Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. My name is Arlene Sachs, and this is SALLYANN Sachs. And today we're glad to welcome Olga Zabludoff. Welcome, Olga. We're delighted to have you here today. Olga is the writer and editor who started her career with Macmillan, and then in D.C. she worked as editor-in-chief of Public Telecommunications Review, the official magazine of public radio and public television. Well, that seems a long way from what we're going to be talking to you about. Olga did a very interesting project in restoring some graves in Butrimonys, if I'm saying it right.
Butrimonys.
And we want to talk to you about that. First of all, I guess that's where your family came from, your mother and grandfather?
Yes.
So you knew the name of the town?
I knew the name of the town, and that was about all I really did know. My mother had been born in Butrimonys.
That's in Lithuania?
In Lithuania, in the southern part of Lithuania. And she and my father, as soon as they were married, left for Cape Town, South Africa. Unfortunately, the rest of their family that remained in Butrimonys died in the Holocaust. So this was not a subject that was spoken about very often as I was growing up. And all I had were photographs of my grandmother, some uncles, aunts, and cousins. And my mother would not like to speak about that. I would ask her, who are these people? And she would say, well, they're family, they're dead, they're dead. And that was fairly typical of parents who had partially almost a guilt complex. They didn't want to talk about what had happened to their family. Yes, but I did know about the town, and that was about all I knew, though.
So then when did you get started? Well, first of all, describe the project that you, or just out in brief, what did you decide to do?
What did I decide to do? It was a very, very evolutionary, slow thing. Actually, what triggered the whole thing was that in 1992, my sister and I had decided to take a trip to Butrimonys. We went to many more places in Lithuania and Eastern Europe, but obviously our main motivation for going was to return or to see Butrimonys, something we could not even imagine.
92 was soon after the dissolution of the Soviet Union.
It was something like 6 months afterwards.
Because I was in Moscow.
Yes, and it took me almost 6 months to plan the trip very, very carefully because not too many people had gone there. We really didn't get much help from travel agents or anyone. And it took me about 6 months to plan it, day by day, and train by train, and whatever way we would, you know,
that was
travel.
Very much of a pioneer effort. You weren't going with a group. You were designing it yourself. Had you done a lot of travel in the past? I mean, I'm curious that you were brave enough to do that.
Well, it was in many ways a gutsy thing to do, and I have to say that my sister was the one who pushed it. I was the one who did the work, which usually happens, but she was absolutely relentless. We have to go, we have to go. And after that she backed off and I did the work. And yes, it was in a way a pioneer thing to do. We didn't know what would happen once we got there, but we were willing, you know, to certainly try it out.
So in 92, you saw the state of the cemetery.
Yes, so in 92, we entered the town of Butrimonys. We saw the cemetery. We saw, even more important to us was to see the 2 mass graves. We didn't know there would be 2 mass graves. We knew there was a mass grave. And what happened really, the very important thing that happened was as we were walking through the town, and we did actually have a guide at that point because we did not speak Lithuanian, and the guide bumped into some local people. There was a lot of curiosity surrounding our visit. You know, we were Americans and what we were doing in this town. And the guide spoke to someone who said, there's an old lady in the village who can speak their language. So I assumed, oh, she can speak English.
Yiddish?
No, it's Yiddish.
It was Yiddish.
And
it turned out she was Yiddish.
And you speak Yiddish.
I speak Yiddish. You know, it was spoken very much in our house growing up,
Right.
and it just stuck with us. So we did go over and we met the old lady whose name was Domicili, and it turned out she had known my grandmother, she had known my mother when she had lived there, remembered the names. I had a few photographs, and she would yell out, "This is Eliyahu, this is Dov Ber," and I mean, we were absolutely, you know, beyond words, speechless, and speaking in Yiddish with her, and she would sing songs in Yiddish, and I said, "How do you know all this?" And she said that since she was about 10 years old, she had worked as a maid in Jewish homes, and she learned all the traditions and the language and everything. And of course, she was the one who gave us her remembrance of the Holocaust. She had been about 25 years old, so she was certainly old enough to remember.
That, in some ways, you wrote a marvelous article for AVOTOYNA about your second trip, and in that you described her telling what she remembered, which for me almost was more important. I mean, the cemetery restoration was important, but in terms of history, having her do her agreement to do this, I thought was an amazing accomplishment on your part, and really very valuable.
Yes, and she had excellent recall, and she didn't. She was one person who did not try to diminish the roles of the Lithuanian locals in the entire event. She told me actually that many of her friends had very much been helpers in the effort to destroy and liquidate the Jewish population.
Did she get into trouble because she had worked for Jews at all? Did you mention that?
No, she didn't get into trouble, but she was fairly respected in the town as an elder, but I don't think they appreciated when she actually told very much the truth of what had happened.
That's what you wrote about so clearly.
Because I know at one point, I don't know exactly what year, in Germany, you weren't allowed to work for a Jewish family.
Oh, that was after the laws were passed.
If you were under 40. Because my parents was over 40 at the point.
They didn't pass those laws in Lithuania. The Germans just came in and shot everybody. Or the Lithuanians shot them. It's They were wiped out in a pretty blunt way.
Oh, yes, yes.
So while you were there in '92, did you decide to restore the cemetery?
No, we visited the cemetery, and it was beyond belief. I mean, I couldn't even envision doing anything, and we weren't even thinking along those lines. But we were horrified by the condition of it. It was absolutely a totally abandoned plot, huge, probably over half an acre in size. The fence was missing and falling down. Animals, dogs and cats and horses were roaming around. I noticed that there was still a large number of stones standing. Many were toppled over. It was really pretty awful. But there was a lot remaining, which amazed me, because in many of these cemeteries, they literally, particularly when the Soviets came in after the war, they just leveled the plots and built on it and whatever. And it looked like, apart from natural deterioration, it hadn't really been tampered with. I didn't think of doing anything at that time. We returned in 1998. It was our second visit, and at that point I started thinking that it really, something needed to be done, but I didn't know what.
What made you go back 6 years later?
Pulling. The first time I went, I said, I'll never go back again. It was just too painful and too much, you know. It was wonderful to have learned and discovered, but I didn't think I ever wanted to set foot there again. But a strange thing happens, and it continues to happen, a pulling to go back one more time. Also to see Domicili again and her family, because she became the grandmother I had lost. She really did. She knew my grandmother, and she simply substituted for that. And so there's always that pulling to go back one more time to see it again.
In the years between 92 and 98, and again from May 2003, did you meet others who had roots in Butrimonys? Did you find in the Jewish Genealogy Network other people with these roots?
Yes, a small group.
Did they become interested in any, were they involved with the restoration, or were you still leading the effort?
Well, ultimately they did become involved. Basically, one other person in Washington, D.C. was incredibly instrumental in pushing it along. He wanted to see it done. He was not interested in going. He always said, I have no desire to go to Lithuania and to any of these places, but he wanted to see it accomplished. And then there was a young woman from California, from Palo Alto, who became interested, and we communicated, and she said, if you ever do this, I would like to be a part of it.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
So then how did you get
started?
How did it get to be a project? I mean, there's still a long way from that.
Right. I started thinking about doing it, and then I said, how do you do it? You know, how does one do it? So I first of all contacted the U.S. Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad. And this is an organization in Washington, D.C. And I had heard that they had done projects like this, not in Lithuania, but I believe in Ukraine, in a few other places, or Poland particularly. So I contacted them, and I had a few meetings with who was then the executive director.
Joe Barry's?
Correct. And we stumbled through ideas and things, but it wasn't really going anywhere, because I discovered that if they were to actually carry out a project like this for us, they would be stumbling in many ways. They didn't have any contacts with Lithuanians. They didn't have any contacts, certainly in Butrimonys. So it would mean going through Vilnius, and as it turned out, they said, well, we could work through the American Embassy in Vilnius. And they did assign, ultimately, an economist, an economic attaché from the embassy, the American Embassy in Vilnius. And he left a lot to be desired. He didn't have much time, and it seemed so foreign to what needed to be done. So ultimately, I simply decided that the best way to do it was to do it ourselves, to get in touch with the locals, and to try to work in a very direct way.
So you say get in touch with the locals. Who did you get in touch with?
Domicili has a grandson who lives in Klaipėda, which is quite far from Butrimonys, but this grandson is absolutely fluent in English, is an educated guy, and furthermore, after writing to him longhand, I discovered he had email, and he said, in the future, why don't we email one another? And I emailed him, and I told him we would really like to restore the cemetery and the mass graves. We know, a lot of work needs to be done. Will you help us? And he immediately responded and said, I will help you in every way I can. And he did suggest, and this was the best suggestion, which I may not have thought of on my own. He said, you must get in touch with the mayor of Butrimonys. The cemetery at that stage was owned by the municipal government. So in a sense, we did not have the right to come in and start redoing things. And one thing led to another. I wrote a letter to the mayor, which I emailed to this grandson of Domicili. He translated it and delivered it to the mayor, and the mayor was very supportive. And one thing led to another, and we planned and worked, and I asked them to please take a look at the cemetery and the mass grave, since we hadn't been there for a good number of years, and they gave me an assessment of what they thought needed doing.
So what I'm hearing is that for anybody who wants to start this, well, maybe it's different now, but in those days, you needed a local contact. You needed somebody to to be your partner on the other side, or you probably wouldn't have been able to do it.
I really think that was crucial.
Did you need to bring in, like, the implements of wires, or did they, or whatever you needed, or did they have?
Did you read her story about how they shopped?
Well, that turned out to be an adventure, but it was possible. I should say that we had the help of 4 local people, and in fact it was the son and the daughter-in-law of Domicili, and they recruited 2 friends. So we really had a good local team.
If you didn't have Domicili, the whole thing sounds like you would have been.
It sounds as if Olga is really very much of a pioneer, because I've since learned about actually one college, and Dartmouth College has taken a group of students to Belarus.
That's right.
That's sort of like an anthropological. Right.
Yes.
So, but you know what? As a psychologist, I really wanted to ask you something.
Yes.
Do you have any idea what made you want to do it?
I think that too grew out of genealogy. I had been doing genealogy since about 1988. So by the time I made the first trip, I already had learned a little bit about my family. Not that much, you know, but I think it grew out of discovering who the ancestors were and getting to appreciate, really appreciate what came before, who I am, what came before us.
You then recruited people, and this is such a marvelous picture that was on the back cover of AVOTOYNA.
People working on the film.
That was a group of the locals working on the fence.
You know, it's interesting. You talked about the pull to go back and this feeling of these were my ancestors, these were my people, and this is where they are.
Yes.
And there is also, I don't, you know, what comes to my mind is the Jewish tradition to maintain the cemetery, which is so strong.
Yes.
That, you know, the cemetery in Manhattan is a Jewish cemetery. They won't sell it.
Yes. In fact, one thing that also was quite instrumental is doing my research on Butrimonys, I came across a letter which had been written in 1923 by the rabbi of Butrimonys, who in fact was the rabbi in the shower, and he died along with the rest of the people. But he had written this letter to an American who had been born in Butrimonys, one Henry Hurwitz, who lived in New York City, and he was pleading. He said, our cemetery is in a state of disrepair. We need a new fence. There is no way we can afford it. This was 1923, when conditions in Lithuania were really impossible, and I was so moved, and he said what the cemetery looked like, and I thought, this is exactly what it looked like, some 45, 50 years later when we were there. And of course, as a rabbi, he wrote about how important this is to the Jewish tradition. So I knew there was a mitzvah involved, and it was a very important thing to do. And the only thing left in the town is the cemetery and the mass grave. There is no other sign that Jews were ever present. And of course, the old people in the town would rather forget about it or pretend it didn't happen. And the young people know nothing.
Did you have to pay the people, or we paid
the people, and I'm sure that even though they became great friends, because there's nothing like working together every day on manual labor, side by side, swatting the mosquitoes, you know, dealing with the heat and all of that. So we became very, very close friends. But the good thing about it, I think initially they were motivated by the idea of earning a little extra money.
Sure, I'm sure this was not a prosperous little town when you showed.
No,
not at all.
Totally bankrupt town.
So, to what do you attribute the success of the project? What do you think really did it?
First of all, I think the planning, the organization was very, very important. And I tend to be an organized person, and I went overboard with this project because I was very nervous. I didn't know what would happen. I was afraid of undertaking it. So I over-organized and organized and wrote to everybody. And incidentally, another thing that contributed was the priest. He became very involved.
How interesting.
Yes.
Before you showed up, or while you were here?
No, I was told through my contact, my email contact, that both the mayor and the priest were very supportive of the project and would help in any way they could.
Now that's interesting, because it sounds as if they were somewhat different than the people you're describing who would rather forget it.
Well, both the mayor and the priest were obviously born after the war. And the mayor was an educated, enlightened, very compassionate man. And from the moment I saw him and we made eye contact, I knew what his feelings were. And the priest turned out to be, he would walk around the cemetery while we were working. And one funny incident was we worked on Saturdays and Sundays also, because we needed as much time as we could get to finish it. And one day the priest came walking through the cemetery on a Saturday, and he said, "Why are you working on the Shabbat?" And all I could think of was to say to him, "But this is holy work."
Yes.
And he laughed.
Yes. So where did you get your supplies? Because I asked that
before. Okay. The local people obviously knew. We drove to a nearby town, perhaps half an hour, the large town in the area called Alytus. And Alytus had what I would describe as a very, very large hardware store, which became like our Home Depot. They had everything, not in huge variety, not in gigantic quantities, some of the things they had to order, but the fact is we got everything we needed, and we took about 2 or 3 trips.
How did you know what you needed? How would you know where to start?
I'm very experienced. My husband and I renovated a very, very old house in Washington, D.C., and we renovated for 10 years. And I know, even though it doesn't compare with renovating a cemetery, I know that you need sandpaper, and I know you need certain chemicals, and I know you need masks and gloves and certain paint. And I was experienced when it comes to construction.
And where did the money come from?
The money? The money came from a few years earlier. I had published a Yiska book, a memorial book on the town. It was not actually an original. It had been written in Russian, and it had been originally published in Israel. And my little group, the same people who worked with me on the cemetery project, all got together and had the book translated into English, and then my sister and I, who are both editors by profession, produced the book. I thought originally that we would print perhaps 200 copies and give it away to any interested parties, but it turned out there really was quite a market for the book. It was one of the first English Yiska books.
Right.
So everybody wanted it, and we sold and we sold and we sold. And we created the cemetery fund from the proceeds of the book. So that paid not only for the restoration, but I would say we have enough for 20, 25 years of maintenance.
So that's the next question.
Yes.
Does anybody maintain the site?
2 members of our crew are the caretakers. I send them every year $100 in the spring, and they take care of whatever needs to be done. Now, I will say, if it's very major, if at some point the fence needs sections replaced or big work done, of course I would always send them more, but basically the $100 covers annual maintenance, a clean up every spring, touch up painting, getting rid of huge vegetation. The winters are very, very harsh there, so what happens after a winter, the cemetery really is in disrepair.
Before, we're going to run out of time, but I guess I want to know, what do you think was the primary value of doing this?
Oh, I think the value is really in how it impressed the local people. I think it in some ways made them realize that that there are still people in this world who care about what had happened in their town 60 years ago and who remembered their ancestors living there. And I think one of the benefits was that the school became very interested in the project, and in fact asked that I send them a videotape of the whole restoration and a videotape of an interview I did with Domicili, who basically told all. And they are using, plus the little Yiska book in English, and they are using these materials in their Holocaust Studies program.
Did they have a Holocaust Studies program before that?
No, they
So
didn't.
you initiated that. That's,
I guess
your activity
it's came out of that.
It's much more than just, it became much more than just restoring a piece of land and
right, you know,
it really did. It for the local population and in many ways for us too. You know, we went there to clean up a cemetery, and we got so much more out of it. I mean, just reaching the locals and
how many went with you?
My husband and I and Lisabeth Kaplan, who was from California. Just 3 of us went, and as I said, we hired 4 people in addition. So really 7 people were working every day, long hours, and we worked for about 2 weeks and 2 days. I think it was 15, 16 days.
Wow. Where did you stay?
Well, we stayed in Vilnius. There's absolutely no place to stay in Butrimonys. As it turned out, maybe some of the locals would have put us up, but the truth is we really wanted the idea of a hot shower at the end of the day.
And how much driving from Vilnius? How long is it?
A little under an hour. We would get up about 5 o'clock, leave our hotel. We actually had a little apartment in Vilnius for the period. Leave around 6 in the morning, and usually by 7 or 7:15 we would be in Butrimonys and ready to begin our day.
Amazing.
It's a long day.
Well, and also you have to worry about it raining. You know, you did comment that it rained a little bit there.
It rained a lot. It was during the rainy season.
Did you know that it was the rainy season before you came?
Well, they told me it rains, but I didn't take it terribly seriously. I really believed I could change that.
What month? You went in May.
We went in May, and it rained a lot. But the rain ends and the sun comes out, so if we couldn't work in the morning, we'd work in the afternoon.
You don't get days on end where it's
right. No, it wasn't like that. It would be a quick, heavy rain, and it would be over.
Well, thank you so very much. It's been a really marvelous talking to you and learning about all of this.
And you're really gutsy. I just have to say, that was a very gutsy thing to do.
Thank you.
Worthwhile.
Thank you very much.